After adjusting to the uniquely mild and welcoming climate of the Svalbard Islands at minus 20 degrees, with the magic of the midnight sun still in our eyes and the season's last sunset over Longyearbyen, it's time to dive into our Arctic expedition. This time, we're pushing to the ends of the Earth, following the legend of explorer Umberto Nobile and his airship Italia to the North Pole. For us, there will be only one possible way, though: the snowmobile. In this crazy new adventure, we'll set off from the northernmost city in the world to reach the northernmost Soviet ghost town in the world, Pyramiden. After the trip to Chernobyl, we've worked for months on this new expedition, much more complex than the others, and not just because of the climate. No phone, no internet, only polar bears. It will be a challenging, incredibly intense, and exhilarating journey, but one that might fundamentally transform our entire perception of travel forever. You guys settle in and make yourselves comfortable, because we're about to face the grueling, lengthy, and exceptionally complex 150 kilometers of our entire lives. Welcome to this brand new video. Right now, we are setting off on our powerful snowmobiles for a long journey. Obviously, we will be accompanied by professional armed guides at all times, because it is simply not possible to reach this remote Soviet outpost on your own. And above all else, the absolute #1 danger here is the polar bear. Now, we have made a brief stop here, and we have to continue in this direction. Today, we'll have to cover about 130 to 140 kilometers. And I'd been on a snowmobile before, but today there's a truly terrible wind on these plains. Driving's not at all easy with the crosswind blowing us away. In any case, we've stopped here now because we're just a few kilometers from Longyearbyen, and on this mountain in August of 1996. So not even too many years ago, a flight from Moscow carrying 130 residents of the city of Pyramiden crashed right on this mountain. All Russian and Ukrainian residents who died. That was, in a sense, the final blow to the city of Pyramiden, which was already losing its population. All of a sudden, the city lost 130 inhabitants, and shortly after that, the city of Pyramiden, in a tragic turn of events, it was actually abandoned and evacuated forever, leaving behind a haunting silence where life once thrived. The residents were forced to flee, never to return to their homes again. Now, after a long journey, we have finally stopped at this entirely new spot, where we have a chance to catch our breath and observe the landscape that stretches out before us in every direction. There are several massive chunks of frozen ice emerging here from the ground, and it's absolutely incredible and truly mind-blowing. Before we start, if you want to support more adventures like these, please subscribe down here on the right and hit the bell. As always, every new adventure brings with it new emotions and curiosity. But we realized almost immediately that during this day of travel, it would be very complicated to reach Pyramiden due to crazy weather conditions, strong wind, heavy snow, and above all, zero visibility. At certain moments, it felt like we were inside a white A4 sheet of paper, muffled halfway between sky, dream, and GPS track. Please stay tuned as we have a comprehensive and extensive collection of additional information and detailed insights scheduled to follow, which will provide you with a much deeper understanding of the subject matter once this initial introductory overview has been fully completed and wrapped up. Yet another stop, and this is the exact same harsh weather condition that has been staying with us for what feels like an endless stretch of infinite kilometers now. It is completely and utterly impossible to see anything at all in front of us. Let us just say that right now it is all becoming much clearer why this is basically a tour that is almost always done in the peak of the summer. Who are we to think we could do it in the summer? Absolutely no one at all. After traveling across quite a few grueling kilometers of frozen terrain, we have finally arrived at the primary reason why I've always wanted to visit the abandoned settlement of Pyramiden during the peak of the winter season. Looking around at the silent, snow-covered structures against the stark Arctic backdrop, I honestly don't think much else needs to be said to justify this trip. The sheer isolation and haunting beauty of this place speak for themselves. This is the legendary Pyramiden in its most raw and breathtaking form. We're just a few short minutes away from finally arriving in Pyramiden. You can see it clearly down there in the background right there. And I really have to tell you, there's a great bit of excitement in this wait, because it's been over a full year of intense planning, thinking about how to do it and how to reach this remote destination in the winter. Especially because here, there aren't just complex logistical problems to solve, but there are also many other challenges. The usual problems of a political and geopolitical nature. Basically, in all the places of the former Soviet Union, there are always mysteries and difficulties. In the first episode, we saw how the American entrepreneur in 1906, John Longyear, opened the first mine in the territory of the Svalbard Islands. So, the settlement took the name Longyear City, today's Longyearbyen. The Svalbard Treaty, the international treaty signed in 1920, which officially gave full sovereignty of these remote territories to Norway, was actually extended to all the signatory countries of the treaty, 40 in all, with the distinct possibility of exploiting natural resources, especially coal. Later, in 1927, the mining territories of Barentsburg and Pyramiden were ceded to what was then the Soviet Union, and they still remain under Russian property today. These towns were first under the administrative control of the Soviet company Grumont, and they are still managed today by the state-owned company Archipelago. Welcome to Pyramiden. Incredible. Finally, after so much effort, We've arrived at the Red Tulip Hotel, the only place available, as you can easily imagine, to stay overnight in Pyramiden. The hotel is a unique experience in its own right, because inside we find endless Soviet reminders, a nice drink of vodka and pickles for a quality welcome, and we're ready to enjoy. This marks our first actual night spent in the northernmost abandoned Soviet city in the world, as well as our very first dinner of somewhat questionable quality. Today, we finally woke up here in the remote outpost of Pyramiden, and now we are setting off once again on the rugged snowmobiles that originally brought us here. We are currently exploring the vast surrounding Arctic areas for a bit. In the afternoon, however, we are going to take the time to see this historic Soviet city in much greater detail. We find ourselves completely abandoned here, stranded right in the frozen middle of the vast ice fields found throughout the remote Svalbard Islands. After enduring a grueling series of unexpected tip-overs across the jagged terrain, our very first stop is at this remarkably beautiful elevated lake, a unique body of water that historically used to supply the essential resources for the local inhabitants who once lived in this desolate region. The day then began with a few guided tours around the abandoned Pyramiden. We saw a magnificent ice waterfall, then we moved slowly to a deep ice cave to finish the exploration once again on the very edge of the ghost town. There was just enough time to see the famous Bottle House, which was a unique kind of pub where local residents gathered. And here we are to finish at this other scenic lake with these strange elements, always aimed directly at the lake. The careful use of water. For a brief moment, we truly hoped there was another massive Duga radar installation standing right in front of us, or somewhere nearby. But unfortunately, that is simply not the case today. At this point in our journey, after consuming a typical Soviet meal filled with completely undecipherable ingredients, the time has finally come for us to see the haunting Pripyat of the ice. After so much intense snowmobiling, we have finally reached the big day, the long-awaited exploration of Pyramiden. With us today, we have another local guide who is already armed with a rifle at the ready for our safety. This building here is our hotel, the Red Tulip, where we slept last night. Also because you really don't have many other alternatives for staying here. This is essentially your only option. For the sake of completeness, the city of Pyramiden is named after its imposing mountain peak. This mountain is easily recognizable by the unique shape of a giant white pyramid. And here we are today, exploring the abandoned settlement of Pyramiden. This is a fascinating story that closely resembles, in some specific aspects, that of Pripyat, the famous ghost town in Chernobyl. Although the actual reasons for the abandonment are totally different, here, obviously, there was no nuclear explosion or other similar dramas, let's say. This area right here is the center of the town. This is a city that has a clear view of the nearby mines. None of these houses actually had a kitchen, so people lived here but didn't eat here because there was a large communal canteen. In fact, the inhabitants of Pyramiden were quite privileged for the times of the Soviet Union. It's no coincidence that residents here had the highest salaries in the entire Soviet Union, which were about triple that of the rest of the people. On the continent, and above all, they had significant economic privileges and financial benefits. For example, even daily meals were completely and fully subsidized by the state, and the vacation conditions were just as exceptionally favorable. In fact, the inhabitants of Pyramiden had a full month of paid vacation, provided always by the Soviet Union government. Unfortunately, it is important to note that those vacations had to be spent exclusively within the borders of the Union, and this structure served as the primary canteen for the entire facility. Now, let us step through the entrance to explore exactly what remains preserved inside these walls today. In years past, every single one of the hardworking miners would gather here at the end of their long shifts to share a meal and find some rest. It was once a bustling hub of activity, filled with the sounds of conversation and the clatter of plates, but now it stands as a silent monument to a bygone era of industry. As we walk through the debris, we can almost imagine the stories of the men who once called this place their second home. Anyway, it's precisely when you venture into and explore places like these that you truly begin to perceive, you feel as if the times were still current, the immense greatness of the history of the Soviet Union. Thinking about reaching a place like Pyramiden, a location so incredibly inhospitable and so extreme, it's incredible to see how everything was instead thought of as a perfectly designed model of society. It was a vision of absolute perfection, exactly like the city of Pripyat. This was truly a model city in every single aspect because they provided all types of essential services, ranging from sports facilities to leisure time activities. It is honestly crazy to think about it now, and these areas here are the communal kitchens. Despite the biting cold, which is simply atrocious inside these empty rooms, much colder than the freezing temperature we find outside, these kitchens still have their original features. There is truly so much to tell. Who knows? Maybe one day they will even start working again. Absolutely anything is possible in these remote parts. It is really quite impressive to see the actual massive size of these industrial spaces. But it is not at all surprising, because here, at the very peak of Pyramiden's long history, thousands of people lived together in this unique community. There was a population approximately 1,000 permanent residents living there at the time, but these individuals then gradually began to leave these territories to seek out significantly better opportunities and more promising destinations in other regions. This steady and slow migration process continued to unfold over several years. So by the time the year 1996 finally arrived, the city was effectively more or less completely abandoned because only a very tiny and dwindling handful of people still remained in the area. Approximately 400 local residents remained, and so, just like the town of Pripyat was originally built for all those workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, this entire city was constructed to provide a permanent home for all those industrial miners who came here to work, and who have worked here ever since these vast territories, both that of Pyramiden and that of the city of Barentsburg, were officially taken over and administered by the Soviet Union. Here, just outside the main canteen, we also see the very last shows that were screened in Pyramiden, and they were a sort of billboard. Because then afterwards, obviously, they were screened in the cinema theater that we are going to see. In these ones behind me, which were the dormitories, now only a part has been renovated. Not all of them, because here, then the various guides who bring tourists to visit Pyramiden stay to sleep, especially in the summer when there's much more traffic. And this is another reason to visit Pyramiden in winter, because obviously you can enjoy it a bit more on your own, or at least a bit more peacefully. Fun fact, as you can see on the ground floor, grates have been put up because apparently every now and then some bear visits here, and so there are grates to prevent it from entering the house. A polar bear made its way today into the Hotel Isfjord Radio on Svalbard, and 5 employees, they were never in danger. And as you can probably guess, this specific building that we are visiting right now happens to be the only remaining school in the entire town of Pyramiden. If you ever decide to come and visit the abandoned town of Pyramiden during the harsh winter months, You must know that the rooms inside the buildings are actually much colder than the air outside by about 10 degrees. Because of this strange phenomenon, those of us inside the old school were absolutely freezing to death. But then, as soon as you take a step outside into the open air, it almost feels like a warm summer day by comparison, even if it is clearly not. You might not immediately think that this would be the case. From the school we just saw, and this area here represents the rear section of the school building with the children's playground, we've moved on to this building, which used to be a local pub, so this is where the miners would come in the evenings to relax and spend their hard-earned leisure time. As you can see, the ownership or management by the state-owned company Archipelago is also clearly and prominently indicated right here. Archipelago is the specific company that currently holds the rights to the entire settlement of Pyramiden and Barentsburg. It is the Soviet-era and consequently Russian-owned state enterprise that manages these Norwegian territories. They have been doing it ever since they first commenced their extensive operations within the local coal mines, and they still continue to do so today. In fact, the particularly complex and challenging aspect about visiting Pyramiden is exactly this. Because for me to be here, especially following the stringent international sanctions that have been strictly applied to these territories due to the ongoing war in Ukraine, even here, international economic sanctions have significantly limited tourism, or at least limited the tour operators, as there were many who previously used to run regular guided tours to Pyramiden. However, following the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, these tour operators were forced to stop all of their professional services related to Pyramiden and Barentsburg. So, to be here today, I had to go through a specific tour operator that is formally and officially registered as Norwegian, but instead, it's a bit of a front. A front because there's actually a Russian company behind it. Now, from the school, let's go see one of the various dormitories here in town. In absolutely none of these various structures do we find a kitchen, for the specific reasons I mentioned at the very beginning, which is that they all ate together in the communal town canteen facility. Here we are on the floor located directly below the living quarters of all the personnel who worked in the mines, and after dinner, this area served as the dedicated evening educational school. They came here for vocational training or remedial courses to gain at least a fundamental and essential basic education minimum. In the main square of Pyramiden, we also find the emblem of the town and of all the Svalbard islands. In fact, specifically, we are obviously at the 79th parallel, obviously the hammer and sickle, but above the world, clearly the red star of communism. But even higher up, at an even superior level, the true master of this place, the polar bear. Now, let's leave for a moment. Instead of staying in the main square, which we will definitely come back to at the very end of our tour, because right now we are heading directly to the administrative offices where the former coal mine management was located. So we are going to check out a few different things there. It will be very interesting to see the interior of the offices and the historic KGB room. Here we are, standing on the upper floors of the administrative mine offices, which we can see situated right in front of us here. And right here, in one of the various rooms we find, there was once a small, clandestine, hidden KGB intelligence headquarters. Okay, man, just look at that heavy door. Everything here is super armored for security. And right over here, we have another reinforced door. As you can clearly see, these are the only specific rooms in the entire building where people actually lived. They're the only rooms in this particular building we are visiting today that have heavy iron bars on all the windows, because this was the secret apartment where people were brought specifically because there was a small official KGB delegation office located right here. It is certainly no coincidence that Pyramiden was also widely considered a sort of gulag. It was to this very place that people came. The various Russian dissidents, or those from many other countries who were forced to serve their long and difficult sentences simply for their different thinking and personal political beliefs. And here directly behind me, standing quite prominently at the very top of the square, we find the northernmost Soviet monument in the entire world. A massive and imposing stone monument featuring the usual big face of Vladimir Lenin looking out over the vast landscape. Lenin that we saw in Chernobyl and that we also saw in Transnistria. Here it is, truly gigantic and imposing. This building here instead is the Grand House of Culture, where we'll go for a guided tour a bit later. While this one directly in front is the massive sports hall, which, as we can clearly read over there, was formerly dedicated to the Yuri Gagarin Sports Center, named after the first man in space. And it's right here in this very spot that we find. This is a famous and iconic swimming pool from the Soviet era, located in those model cities, just like Pripyat. Here, they used salt water taken directly from the sea and heated it up. This facility was truly the center of the city's well-being. By the way, we also find a large football field nearby, because here in Soviet times, there is one situated right outside there where the local teams from Pyramiden would regularly compete in the matches. They are competing against the formidable team from Longyearbyen. And here it is, the famous heated indoor pool of Pyramiden, where the diving board is now completely missing, leaving behind a silent and empty space that once echoed with the sounds of swimmers. And here it is, the heated swimming pool of Pyramiden. The diving board is completely missing, unlike the one in Pripyat, but it's incredibly fascinating to see. Also because everything is on such a massive and gigantic scale, which is quite typical, as usual, when talking about the Soviet Union. Holy cow. This one, instead, was the second pool intended for children, as we can also see from the water level that marked the edges. Gyms, sports fields, cinema, theater, there was really everything, as in the best cases of the model cities of the former Soviet Union. Over here, we also have the dedicated music room, which exists because many beautiful musical instruments arrived with a large shipment by sea. And this right here is the piano. Red October. I wonder how many of you actually get the chance to come to the remote town of Pyramiden. and turn everything on?
We'd like to welcome you to the historic Pyramiden Stadium. And so, from the Palace of Culture, we have more or less reached the end of this second episode from the Svalbard Islands.
Now, there's just one small detail. We have to go back by snowmobile to Longyearbyen. Before leaving the historic city of Pyramiden forever, this is our very last look at this place. We see the iconic city sign with a heavy cart full of coal sitting right underneath it. The very last coal extraction here was completed back in the year 1998, just before definitively leaving the city to its own silent fate. And with this heavy, wonderful snowfall, I'll say goodbye to you from here. From Pyramiden, the abandoned Soviet city amidst the ice of the Svalbard Islands. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming travel videos, documentaries, and everything else to come.